everyone, in this video I'm going to be breaking down Volume 1 of Alan Moore's historic Swamp Thing run. And over the course of the next several weeks, I'm going to break down his entire run, which should span about 6 videos. I'm very excited to dive into this Swamp Thing run. It is very historic and influential. It revitalized the character. It ushered in a British invasion at DC Comics. And also Alan Moore followed it up with Watchmen, the greatest graphic novel of all time. Now, one thing about Alan Moore's run is that he started Swamp Thing at issue 20 of the second Swamp Thing series. So there is a lot of Swamp Thing comics before his run. And if you jump right into Alan Moore, it can be a little confusing because you won't have full context for all of the characters. So I did an hour and 50-minute mega video breaking down all of the Swamp Thing history leading into Alan Moore's run. Some of it really good, some of it kind of bad, but I think it is kind of fun to have the good and the bad and see how it all went down. So watch that video if you want the full context of everything Swamp Thing leading into Alan Moore. However, for those of you that want to just dive into Alan Moore Swamp Thing right now, I'm going to do a quick 9-minute Cliff Notes version breaking down all the Swamp Thing characters and their status quo leading into Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run. So let's dive into that right now. Here is the Swamp Thing character breakdown leading into Alan Moore. Years ago, Alec Holland and his wife Linda Holland were scientists working on something in the Louisiana swamps called the biorestorative formula. The formula was designed to stimulate hormonal growth in plant life, enabling plants to grow in hostile terrain. This would solve any nation's food shortage problems. The two of them got killed over this formula. Others wanted the research and wanted to know the secrets of it. Alec was killed in an explosion. He got doused with the biorestorative chemicals and fell into a swamp, and he became the monster known as Swamp Thing. And his wife, Linda Holland, was killed shortly after by some goons from a criminal organization called the Conclave, whose leader was a man named Nathan Ellery. Swamp Thing did manage to get his revenge on the Conclave and Nathan Ellery, though, and they are no more. Swamp Thing's main allies are Matt Cable and Abigail Arcane. They went on many adventures in the first Swamp Thing series, which spanned 24 issues. The majority of the issues involved the three of them somehow going on some sort of wacky adventure together. Matt Cable, he was a secret agent for an organization known as the Defense Department Intelligence, or DDI. And Abigail Arcane kind of tagged along with him, eventually becoming his girlfriend and then wife. Swamp Thing also had some newer allies in the second Swamp Thing series. They are reporter Liz Tremaine, Dr. Dennis Barkley, and another doctor/scientist named Harry Kay. The three of them are all ex-employees of an evil organization called the Sunderland Corporation. Ever since they found out all the evil that Sunderland was really up to, they have been in hiding and helping Swamp Thing. One of Swamp Thing's villains right now is DDI Director Dwight Wicker. Dwight Wicker's government agency was the one funding the biorestorative formula research. However, they considered the whole thing a major fiasco, so Dwight wanted everyone that knew anything about the biorestorative formula, as well as Swamp Thing himself, dead. Although, if possible, Dwight Wicker would still love to unlock the secrets of the biorestorative formula. DDI Director Dwight Wicker had subcontracted out this dirty work of removing all of these people to his friend and mentor, Avery Sunderland, who is the president and CEO of the Sunderland Corporation. So, through the DDI and Sunderland, Swamp Thing and his allies, Matt Cable, Abigail Arcane, Liz Tremaine, Dennis Barkley, and Harry Kay, are all under attack. The Sunderland Corporation also recently dug up Alec Holland's wife's grave, Linda Holland, and took her body to study it. Now, Matt Cable, he used to work for this DDI. He was considered a liability as he knew too much. So the DDI wanted to get rid of him. Rather than just kill him, though, they subjected Matt Cable to shock therapy, attempting to give him amnesia. It didn't work, though. Matt Cable still remembers everything they wanted him to forget. But the shock therapy did mess him up. He is not the man he used to be. His mind is all shattered. He can no longer fully function. He used to be a suave, capable secret agent and investigator, but now he can barely hold the simplest job. He has also turned to alcohol and is a full-blown alcoholic. His character is so drastically different than who he used to be, I now jokingly refer to him as Deadbeat Matt Cable instead. On top of all that, the shock therapy that they gave Matt Cable somehow also gave him this weird power. His subconscious mind can create these mind monsters that attack people. At first, Matt Cable did not know what was happening. He did not fully understand his new affliction, but slowly he is starting to master it. In terms of Swamp Thing's villains, beyond Dwight Wicker and Avery Sunderland, Swamp Thing's main villain, and the scariest one, is a man named Anton Arcane. Anton Arcane has been on and off again fighting Swamp Thing ever since the very first issue of Swamp Thing in 1972. Anton Arcane is an evil mad scientist obsessed with immortality. He spent decades studying science and sorcery. He conducted bizarre experiments. Through his bizarre experiments, he manipulated the genetic stock of random humans, creating a subspecies race of mutated freaks. These freaks are called unmen. These unmen follow Anton Arcane's orders and are typically too dim-witted to think for themselves. Anton Arcane has managed to unlock the secrets of immortality, but because he was an old man when he finally made this breakthrough, he has become obsessed with transferring his mind into a new, more suitable body for him, and he has decided that Swamp Thing is the body that he wants. Swamp Thing is the form that will carry him through to eternity. Anton Arcane is the uncle of Abigail Arcane. Abigail, though, is a good person and pretty estranged from her uncle, but she did consider him family. Anton Arcane first met Swamp Thing when he kidnapped him and brought him to his castle in the Balkans in Europe. In that first interaction, Anton Arcane died by falling off a cliff to his supposed death, where he broke every bone in his body. However, his unmen gathered him and transferred his mind into a new, shittier, grotesque body. Arcane, he then looked like a monster instead of human. Anton Arcane then striked at Swamp Thing again, but he somehow got killed this second time by the ghosts of vengeful dead slaves that rose from the grave and ripped him apart. Years later, Anton Arcane somehow came back to life again from this, once again through unexplained science and sorcery. His unmen put him together into an even shittier, even more grotesque body, this time merged with insects. And last issue in Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 19, Anton Arcane abducted Swamp Thing and Abigail. Anton, he attempted to turn Abigail into an unman, and he also attempted to transfer his own mind into Swamp Thing's body. But in the middle of that mind transfer process, it got interrupted by Swamp Thing's ally, Harry K. Harry K gave up his life to stop the mind transfer process in the middle of it. By interrupting this process, Anton Arcane's mind got sent into the void, and his body died, and it got eaten by his unmen. Afterwards, Swamp Thing and Abigail escaped, and that is how the last issue of Martin Pasco's run ended, and Alan Moore is going to pick it up right from there. So once again, we got Swamp Thing and his allies, Matt Cable, Abigail Arcane, Liz Tremaine, and Dennis Barkley. Harry K has died. Swamp Thing's villains are DDI director Dwight Wicker, and CEO of the Sunderland Corporation, Avery Sunderland, and beyond that, there is Anton Arcane, who seems like he died last issue. Alright, now let's dive into Alan Moore. Swamp Thing Book 1, written by Alan Moore, Art by Stephen Bissette and John Totleben. Swamp Thing, Volume 2, Issue 20, Loose Ends. Swamp Thing, before he does anything, feels like he needs to make sure that Anton Arcane is really dead this time, as Anton Arcane has returned a few times now, seemingly from the dead. Swamp Thing, he walks and he finds Anton Arcane's corpse that has been partially chewed by the unmen. Swamp Thing, he feels that Anton Arcane seems really dead this time. He thinks to himself as he studies Arcane's body. So it's true, you're dead. You're really dead. I don't think I realized before how important you are to my life, Arcane. I don't think I really understood before this moment. You are my opposite. I had my humanity taken away from me. I've been trying to claw it back. You started out as human and you threw it all away. You did it deliberately. We defined each other, didn't we? By understanding you, I came that much closer to understanding myself, and now you're dead. You're really dead. At an office somewhere, Avery Sunderland of the Sunderland Corporation is talking with Dwight Wicker of the government agency DDI. Sunderland says that his people have discovered where Swamp Thing and his friends are. Swamp Thing had an extremely noisy battle with an old adversary of his named Arcane. Sunderland says that his forces will storm the area and catch Swamp Thing and his allies while their guard is down. Sunderland, he brags that his corporation is like a death machine. It's sleek and coordinated and efficient. All you have to do is point it in the right direction and set it in motion. Elsewhere, Swamp Thing's allies, reporter Liz Tremaine and Dr. Dennis Barkley, both ex-employees of the Sunderland Corporation, they wake up in their broken-down van. Last issue, they got separated from Swamp Thing, Matt Cable, and Abigail. They were driving back to their motel room to pick up some of Dennis's medical supplies. But on their drive back, their car veered off the road and crashed in a secluded area, and they decided to spend the night in their car and head out in the morning. Last night, as they stayed in that broken-down car together, their relationship progressed a bit. They kissed. They grew closer. Now in the morning, though, as they begin walking back to their motel, Liz is starting to have second thoughts about the two of them being more than friends. She tells Dennis that all they have in common is the horror in their lives, and if they ever really got together, they'd probably hate each other. Dennis is kind of hurt by this, and he storms off ahead of her. Swamp Thing, he returns to the motel to meet Liz and Dennis, but they have not arrived yet. While Swamp Thing is there, he thinks about Anton Arcane once again. He wonders if the two of them were meant to live in another time when monsters like them would be more at home. Perhaps the world has run out of room for monsters. Sunderland's forces slowly start moving in on the town where Swamp Thing and his allies are. We see military trucks and soldiers and helicopters start arriving. Elsewhere, Abigail Arcane, now known as Abigail Cable, arrives home to meet with Matt Cable, her husband. She explains how Swamp Thing went to look at the wreckage of Arcane's ship to see if he was really dead, and that he should be back soon. She also shares how Swamp Thing had worried that Matt was the one that caused the monsters and horrors that they saw recently. Abigail is referring to the mind monsters of Matt Cable that were created as a byproduct of his shock therapy. The shock therapy that DDI and Sunderland subjected him to try to give him amnesia. Matt admits that, while he didn't know it until recently, he was the cause of those monsters, but he says he's beaten it now. He's fought back against them and they just vanished. He feels great now. He's ridden himself from that nightmare. Matt Cable, he then tells Abby how much he loves her, and then he tries to instigate some lovemaking with Abby. Abby, she has just been through a lot. This is clearly a bad time. Monsters from her husband's mind attacked them recently, and she was just kidnapped by Anton Arcane and almost turned into an unman? No, Abby is too shaken from recent events to go through with anything like that. Matt, he relents his advances, and Abigail then goes for a walk outside without him. While Abby is gone, though, Matt, he returns to his drinking, his alcoholism. Matt, he lied to Abby about managing to overcome those mind visions of his. Instead of destroying them and banishing them forever, he has now just simply learned to control them. Matt, he then looks at his hand, and he has a sexy blue lady dance for him that he created with his mind. So Matt seems to be using his new powers now for perverted purposes. Back at the motel, Liz, she tries to convince the woman in the lobby to give her the key to her room so she can get the medical bag from inside of it. The lobby woman says, "Oh yeah, a couple of friends of yours dropped by earlier. Maybe they were doctors too. I told them to go to your room." Liz does not think this strange. She assumes it was probably Matt or Abby. A man in the lobby, perhaps a hotel employee, his name was Heck Dallas Brandon, and he takes the key himself and offers to retrieve the bag for Liz. As the man walks away to do this, the lobby clerk, she struggles to recall the name that was mentioned by the people earlier, the ones that she gave the key to the motel room to. Eventually, she says, "Yeah, I think their name was Sutherland? Actually, wait, maybe it wasn't that. I'm thinking of Donald Sutherland, the actor? Oh no, what was their name?" The lobby woman is confused, but she is actually referring to somebody from the Sunderland Corporation, the evil corporation headed by Avery Sunderland, the one that wants to kill Swamp Thing and all of his friends. So someone from Sunderland came here and went into Liz and Dennis's motel room. As Heck Brandon goes to retrieve the bag for Liz, he opens the motel room door and it explodes, killing him. Sunderland rigged the room to explode to try and kill Liz and Dennis. Luckily though, Liz and Dennis were not in their room. Liz and Dennis, after the explosion, realize that they need to get out of here before some of Sunderland's goons come to finish them off. Meanwhile, in the forests, Sunderland's men, equipped with flamethrowers, start burning down the forest that Swamp Thing is in. They are hunting him. At the same time, a Sunderland helicopter is flying up in the air. It flies over to Matt and Abigail's cabin, and it opens fire on it and destroys it. Luckily, Matt and Abigail survive the attack as they were outside. When they heard all of the helicopters and commotion earlier, they left their cabin to investigate it. So the two of them are okay for now. Swamp Thing, he is angry that these soldiers are burning down the forest, so he starts attacking them back. He grabs a Sunderland soldier and tosses the man far away. Swamp Thing, though, he quickly gets outnumbered. Sunderland has helicopters and snipers in the helicopters and guys with flamethrowers. Swamp Thing, he starts trying to run away, but the soldiers outnumber him greatly. They manage to corner him, and then they pump his body with tons of bullets, just shooting him repeatedly, and Swamp Thing goes down. The soldiers presume that they have successfully killed the Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 21, The Anatomy Lesson. This is the issue that really shakes up the status quo of Swamp Thing and completely reshapes his mythology. Avery Sunderland, now having had his men shoot Swamp Thing last issue, has had Swamp Thing's corpse brought back to his corporate offices in Washington to be studied. Sunderland, he wanted a plant expert brought in to study Swamp Thing and see if they could reverse engineer the biorestorative formula and find out some things of the origin of Swamp Thing. So Sunderland organized for the release from prison of a man named Jason Woodrow, aka the villain known as the Floronic Man, or also known as the Plant Master. Jason Woodrow is a comic villain who first appeared in comics in 1962 in the first issue of The Atom. He is a human-like man exiled from an interdimensional world inhabited by a species called Dryads. Dryads are like miniature humanoids that lived in a dimension adjacent to Earth that was only accessible via plants. Jason, used his advanced botanical knowledge to control plant growth in an attempt to take over the world on various occasions. However, he was always thwarted by Earth's heroes, and he was never really considered a huge threat of a villain. At one point, he used an experimental formula to transform his body into a plant-human hybrid, with his skin resembling bark and his hair turning into leaves. In some ways, he is kind of similar to Swamp Thing in that he is now also part plant. Jason, through the use of something called Flexi-Fresh spray, is able to appear human and mask his plant-like appearance. So, Avery Sunderland pulled some strings and had Jason released from prison and brought to his offices. He had some apartments established for Jason here. He also gave Jason a tour of their labs. Sunderland then brings Jason over to Swamp Thing's body that he wants Jason to work on. Swamp Thing's body is being kept in a type of freezer. When they look at Swamp Thing's body, it has been stored here for about 2 weeks. His body is all gray, brittle, tattooed by frost, seemingly quite dead. Sunderland explains to Jason, this man was Alec Holland. He was doing government work, developing something called the biorestorative formula, which was intended to promote crop growth. The experiment was sabotaged. There was an explosion. Holland and his chemical soup went into the swamp where the project was located. This is what came out. Sunderland also says that they dug up Alec's wife Linda. She would have also been exposed to the biorestorative formula, having worked on it for months with her husband. They wanted to see if the formula permeated her cell structure. However, when they studied her body, interestingly enough, they found nothing. Although, that was, I guess, to be expected because the formula was not designed to affect human tissue, only plants. Although, it is odd because then, if it didn't affect Linda, then how did Alec Holland get turned into this Swamp Thing? Jason Woodrow, he detests Avery Sunderland, and the fact that Sunderland wields so much control over him. He disparagingly refers to Sunderland as an old reptile in his thoughts. But Jason concedes to Sunderland's demands nonetheless. He will study this Swamp Thing. Jason gets to work, and over the next several weeks, he really studies Swamp Thing's body. He performs an autopsy on it. He is excited by what he might discover. While performing his autopsy, he finds that Swamp Thing's body contains non-functional, vegetable versions of normal human organs such as a heart, brain, liver, and kidneys. However, it is odd because none of these plant organs could ever serve any functional purpose due to any lack of true biological material. So why would Swamp Thing's body have these plant organs if they were useless? Finally, after 6 weeks of study, Jason had a major breakthrough. He had an answer. He figured out the truth about Alec Holland and the bio-restorative formula. Jason, he then excitingly explained his findings to Avery Sunderland. He compared Swamp Thing's nature to that of a planarian worm. He says to Sunderland, you see, a while ago some people did an experiment. They taught a planarian worm to run a simple maze. They educated it. They then chopped it up and fed its remains to a batch of planarian worms that couldn't run the maze, except that after digesting their educated comrade, the worms could perfectly run the maze. Don't you see, General? The implication is that consciousness and intelligence can be passed on as foodstuffs. Jason then reveals that when Alec Holland's body was doused with the biorestorative formula and caught on fire in the explosion and he dove into the swamp, Alec Holland actually died then and there. But the plants and microorganisms in the swamp had been altered by the biorestorative formula, and as Alec Holland's body decomposed and the plants in the swamp ate him, it was as if they were planarian worms. The plants became infected with Alec's powerful consciousness that did not realize he was no longer alive, and gradually The plants in the swamp shaped their cells into a form they were more comfortable with, a more human kind of form. Alec's consciousness now permeated in the plants, remembered having bones, so it built itself a skeleton of wood. It remembered having muscles and organs, so it rebuilt those too. It did its best to duplicate them in plant form. The plants absorbed the memories and personality of Alec Holland. In fact, the plants now believed they were Alec Holland himself. Jason tells Avery Sunderland, "You see? We were wrong. We thought the Swamp Thing was Alec Holland, somehow transformed into a plant. It wasn't. It was a plant that thought it was Alec Holland. A plant that was trying its level best to be Alec Holland." Now, this is a massive status quo shift for the Swamp Thing character. Before this, Swamp Thing was a man who became a plant. But in this issue, we learn instead he is actually a plant who dreamed he was a man. Jason, excited by his discoveries, keeps telling Sunderland his findings, he says. But there's something else, something very important. You see, if that's a plant that we have down there, then Sunderland, he cuts Jason off, stops him from talking further. Sunderland has little interest in Jason's findings other than their inherent commercial value. Jason tells Sunderland that he doesn't understand the ramifications of what he's saying to him. He doesn't have the correct background to be able to understand it. Sunderland, he believes that with Jason's breakthrough, he can now have his people take it from here, and he does not need Jason anymore. Sunderland very arrogantly tells Jason, "True, I may have missed some of the ramifications of your rather muddled little speech, but I grasped the basic principle well enough. That principle, that breakthrough, was all that was needed. There are others who can be paid to see the work through to its conclusion. You see, I am very rich. I do not need to be an intellectual. I do not need to understand how this computer here works to know that if I push the little button, all the sprinklers start up or the doors open and close. I do not need the ramifications. I do not need the correct background. And you, Dr. Woodrow, now that you've provided me with my breakthrough, I need you least of all. I have a phone call to make in the outer office. We'll sort out the termination papers when I get back." Jason is upset that Sunderland just fired him. It's only a matter of time now before Sunderland sends him back to prison. Jason is also annoyed that Sunderland was so arrogant and so dismissive of him, and didn't even let him finish what he was trying to say. If Sunderland did let him finish, then Sunderland would have learned that you can't kill a vegetable by shooting it in its head. Oh, sure, you could give it a shock that it would plunge into a cellular coma. You could keep it in that state by placing it in a freezer unit, but you couldn't kill it. Jason, as revenge on Sunderland, tampers with the computers. He opens the freezer doors on the laboratory's lower levels. This allows Swamp Thing to dethaw, and eventually wake up, as Swamp Thing was not truly dead. Swamp Thing awakens from the freezer, and he finds Jason Woodrow's notes. Previously, Swamp Thing, having believed himself to be Alec Holland, always held on to the hope that one day a cure for his condition might be found, and he could resume a normal life as Alec Holland again. But now, having read Jason Woodrow's notes, he has now learned the truth, and he realizes that all hope is lost. He is not Alec Holland. He is merely a plant that believes it is Alec Holland. Later that day, Avery Sunderland makes his way down to the lab to check on Swamp Thing. Only Swamp Thing is now awake and out of the freezer. Swamp Thing, in a frenzy now, having read the files on himself, sees Sunderland and attacks him. Sunderland, scared that Swamp Thing is now alive, knowing the truth of himself, he tries to run away. Swamp Thing pursues Sunderland, and Swamp Thing manages to catch up to Avery Sunderland and grab him and kill him by snapping his body. Elsewhere, Jason Woodrow, not feeling like masking his own plant appearance right now, is in his more plant-like form. We see his wooden skin and his leaves for hair. Jason, the Floronic man, comments on his fascination with the Swamp Thing, and he declares his intention to follow him and learn more. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 22, Swamped. Abigail Cable and her husband, Matt Cable, are searching for Swamp Thing in the swamps. They did not know that Swamp Thing was taken by the Sunderland Corporation a few issues ago, so they have been searching for weeks for him. Matt Cable is getting a little tired of Abby's insistence that they continue to come here and look. For all they know, he's dead. They have their own problems they need to deal with. They do find Swamp Thing, though. Swamp Thing has returned to the swamp, but he is unresponsive. Swamp Thing has taken root in the swamp. Abby worries he is dead. Jason Woodrow has come to the swamp to study Swamp Thing further. He is nearby when Abby and Matt discover Swamp Thing. Jason applies his spray that helps mask his plant-like appearance so he can look like a normal human. He then reveals himself to them. He introduces himself as Dr. Jason Woodrow, a friend of Alec Holland's. He explains how Swamp Thing was captured by Sunderland a few months ago, and he decided to break him out of there. He also explains his discoveries on the true nature of Swamp Thing, how Swamp Thing was never Alec Holland at all, but simply plant matter infected with Holland's consciousness. Jason also says that Swamp Thing is depressed and has given up on being human and has let go. He has fully embraced being a vegetable. He hasn't moved in 2 weeks. He's laid down tap roots and stopped pretending to breathe. He's also started growing these tubers. They seem to be in similar structure to a yam. They might even be edible. Abigail is distraught over Swamp Thing's current state. She leaves with her husband and they return to their motel. Later that night, Matt Cable, alone in his motel room as Abby went out for a bit, he drinks, and he uses his weird mind reality-altering powers to conjure himself up some more scantily clad women to dance for him. He starts talking with the figures. Abigail, when she returns to the motel, she overhears what sounds like a woman's voice inside with her husband. She suspects Matt of cheating on her, but when she bursts into the room to confront Matt, everything is normal. Matt is in the room alone. There is no evidence of what he was up to. Meanwhile, Jason Woodrow is performing experiments on Swamp Thing, hoping to connect to the green through him. The concept of the green has not really been explored in Swamp Thing previously. The green is something, though, that will be mentioned in Swamp Thing going forward. The green is one of the elemental forces in the universe, inherent and connected to all forms of plant life. It is a cosmic energy force that animates all of plant life in the universe. Swamp Thing is connected to the green. His powers stem from them. Unrelated to the green, there is another force in the world known as the red. The red is a force which connects and pervades all animal life and microorganisms in the universe. The red is what the hero Animal Man taps into for his powers to work. Jason, though, he wants to tap into the green, expand his plant powers, and his connection to the green. Through Swamp Thing, he experiments how he can do this. He tries eating Swamp Thing's eye and one of those tubers that grew from him. They were edible, just like he thought earlier. His experiments will continue. Later on, Abigail drags Matt Cable back with her to the swamps. Abigail yells out to Swamp Thing, "Please, Alec, wherever you are, just come back. I don't care what they've told you. I don't care about all of this new scientific evidence concerning your origins. Alec, you are not a damn vegetable, for God's sake." Abby, she starts tearing up. She continues, "You're human, Alec. Alec, you're the most loving, the most gentle, the most human man that I've ever met." Eventually, Matt and Abby leave. Jason was watching them from the shadows. He is annoyed that Abby and Matt returned. They stayed all morning, for Christ's sake. He cannot tolerate further interruptions. Finally, Jason, using Swamp Thing and hooking himself up to various machines, manages to tap into the green, and it strips him of all of his humanity, and he fully embraces his new identity as the Floronic Man. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 23, Another Green World. Swamp Thing still rooted in the ground. His mind just wanders the green, drifting through the cellular landscape. It is silent and beautiful. His awareness expands through the root systems. He starts to feel at peace, maybe even happy. However, he also starts to sense something wrong in the green, a foreign presence. It is the Floronic Man. Elsewhere in town, the Floronic Man starts commanding plants of the green and goes on a rampage of murder and destruction. He starts strangling people with vines. Abigail, as she is driving through town, she starts discovering some of these dead bodies that the Floronic Man has left behind. The Floronic Man, through his connection to the green, starts trying to wrap up Abby in vines as well. The Floronic Man, he uses his vines to destroy buildings in town and bring them crashing down. The townspeople and the local police start trying to attack and shoot at the Floronic Man, but the Floronic Man easily wraps them up in vines as well. The Floronic Man then spots a local boy named William Anslinger, who has a video camera. The Floronic Man has the boy film everything he is doing, as well as he gives the boy a message. Floronic Man, he then, by tapping into the green, connects to all the plants in the town, even something as simple as a potted plant someone might have in their home. He uses these plants to increase the oxygen levels in people's homes to such a high level that people start getting hyper-oxygenated. They start getting excited and nervous without knowing why. The oxygen levels are so high that when someone lights a cigarette, the entire town blows up and goes up in flames. The Floronic Man then says a message on the camera of William Anslinger's, and then he sends the boy to leave town and deliver the tape to the authorities. The boy, he marches on. He walks for 50 minutes. He makes his way to the neighboring town, to their police station. He is in shock. He is rambling. Finally, after 20 minutes, the sergeant decides to watch the videotape the boy had with him. It takes him another 20 minutes for the sergeant to gather the necessary equipment to finally watch the tape. The sergeant finally, after seeing the tape, phoned nearby Morgan City and told them what he saw. Morgan City phoned Washington, and then Washington phoned the Justice League. Elsewhere, Abigail manages to fight through the vines. She makes her way to where Swamp Thing is. She starts pleading with him to wake up. She says that she's scared, that he needs to do something. The Floronic Man with his vines fully grabs Abigail. He's gonna kill her with his vines. But Abigail, she's screaming at Swamp Thing saying, "Alec, they've got my legs, please. I can't hold on, Alec. Oh God, oh God." Through the green, Swamp Thing hears Abby calling to him, and he begins to piece together recent events. He starts coming to grips with the fact that he is not Alec Holland, and he slowly begins to perceive the Floronic Man's negative presence within the green. Swamp Thing, he wakes up. He uproots himself. He saves Abigail moments before the vines would have strangled her. Abigail, she asks, "Alec?" She wants to know if it's really him. Swamp Thing, now accepting he is not human, he replies, "No, not Alec." Swamp Thing, he then walks on, and he finds and confronts the Floronic Man and tells him no more. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 24, Roots. In the Justice League Space Headquarters, they watch the videotape that the Floronic Man made. On the tape, the Floronic Man stands in front of the destroyed town he incinerated by increasing their oxygen to ridiculously high levels. The Floronic Man says on the tape, "You have waged bitter and undeclared war upon the green, gutting the rainforests mile after mile, day after day. But know this, the war has come home. It is man's turn to embrace the Sith. If allowed to live, you will kill your planet. So, you must be removed. From 2 o'clock this morning, the world's plant life increased its production of oxygen tenfold. The first to die will be the very young, and then the very old, the saplings and the stumps. Those that survive will live in an atmosphere so inflammable that any flame, any spark will unleash an inferno. You will regress to the Stone Age and beyond. Within a year, you will all be dead. There's nothing you can do. It is the day. The Justice League members, having watched the videotape, now discuss the situation. In attendance, there is Superman, Aquaman, Green Arrow, Firestorm, Barry Allen Flash, Hal Jordan Green Lantern, Hawkman, Wonder Woman, and Zatanna. The Floronic Man never gave them much trouble in the past, but this time, he seems like he may be our world-ending threat. Superman says he noticed almost 30 major differences in his posture and speech patterns. He has suffered a massive psychological breakdown. Aquaman asks, "So what do we do? Threaten to beat up trees?" The Justice League clearly is not sure how to handle this situation. Down on Earth, Swamp Thing confronts the Floronic Man. Initially, the Floronic Man assumed Swamp Thing had awoken to join him as his companion. He offers Swamp Thing the chance to kill a woman he has captured in his vines. Swamp Thing is not going to do that, though. He chooses to punch the Floronic Man in his face, and he rescues the woman from the vines. The Floronic Man angrily calls Swamp Thing a traitor and stabs him with a sharpened tree trunk. The townspeople, with the Floronic Man preoccupied fighting Swamp Thing, take this opportunity to escape. Back in the Justice League headquarters, they are still debating what to do. Superman tells Hal Jordan maybe he should call Oa. Some of the Green Lantern Corps members are vegetable life forms. Maybe they'll be able to help. Hal doesn't think they would be much assistance. He says alien vegetables would still have the same communication problem that they have. Firestorm, he says maybe he could use his atomic restructuring abilities to convert oxygen molecules into carbon dioxide and restore the balance. Superman says that would not work. Do you know how many molecules make up Earth's atmosphere? There's no way they could get the combination right. Back on Earth, the Floronic Man becomes aware of Abby's presence. He says, "I remember you. In the swamp, you came to visit the traitor when he was rooted in the swamp. I remember." The Floronic Man goes to attack Abby, but then one of the townspeople, an old man bearing a chainsaw, runs at the Floronic Man. Floronic Man, with his vines, whips and kills the old man before the old man can swing at him with the chainsaw. Floronic Man then picks up the chainsaw and decides he will kill Abby with it. As he's holding the chainsaw and is going to strike Abby, Swamp Thing grabs one of the Floronic Man's arms and breaks it. Swamp Thing tells the Floronic Man that he is hurting the Green with his actions. The Floronic Man does not believe Swamp Thing. He tells him, "That's not true. No, that's not true at all. I am the Green's servant. Its will works through me." Swamp Thing points to the death and destruction around them. He tells him, "Look at this carnage and destruction you've caused. This is the way of man. Your way. The Green did not do this. You did." Floronic Man says, "No, lies. The Green told me to do this. This is what it wanted." Swamp Thing replies, "This is what you wanted. You are ill, Woodrow, and you poison the Green with your desires." Floronic Man still refuses to believe what he is doing is wrong. He argues, "The plants will pour out oxygen, and all the animals will die. Only we shall remain, don't you see? It's the only way to save the planet from those creatures." But Swamp Thing, he makes a compelling argument. He tells the Floronic Man that if he kills all the humans and animals, then what will change the oxygen back into the gases like carbon dioxide that they, plants, need to survive? To kill the humans and the animals is to kill the plants as well. The Floronic Man then cries. He thinks on it and realizes that Swamp Thing is right. He screams, "No, no!" In horror, he runs away. He backs down what he was doing with the Green. In the aftermath, Abigail and Swamp Thing then talk. Abigail asks him, You said earlier that you aren't Alec." Swamp Thing replies, "No, Alec Holland is dead. He died many years ago in an explosion, but it has taken him a long time to lie down. He's gone now. He's at rest. Abigail asks, and who are you? Swamp Thing replies, I am Swamp Thing. Abigail questions some more and says, and you're happy? Swamp Thing says, he is. Abigail and him hug. Abigail asks him where will he go? And Swamp Thing answers, where I always go. Back home. Back to the swamp. Floronic Man, he's still running. He senses the Justice League will be coming for him soon. He searches for his Flexi Flesh spray, hoping to appear as human before they arrive. Unfortunately, Superman and Green Lantern arrive too quickly, and the Floronic Man instead appears before them as a grotesque version of his former self. His mental state is clearly fragile. Superman and Green Lantern say that they will take him back to Arkham Asylum, where he can get some help. Swamp Thing, he then returns to his swamp, wondering why he ever would have left. He actually likes it here. He wants to walk here forever. Swamp Thing, he finally embraces his life as a plant. He expands his arms into the air and triumphantly embraces the fresh air of his home. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 25, The Sleep of Reason. Jason Blood, also known as Etrigan the Demon, has come to Louisiana to hunt down a villain of his called the Monkey King, also known as Chimera or the Fear Monster. The Monkey King first appeared in The Demon Issue 4 in 1972. The Monkey King is a demon that uses fear to feed and kill, and he has the ability to change his shape to the worst fear of the person he is attacking. Somehow, this Monkey King has come to Louisiana. So Jason Blood arrives in town at 11 a.m. on a Monday morning. He meets various people, and he says a whole bunch of cryptic things. Jason meets a salesman named Harry Price. He tells Harry that at 5:32 p.m., Harry will be impaled by a swordfish. He also says, unrelatedly, a woman named Selena has already decided not to buy the lawn furniture. Jason, he then goes to a store called Third Eye Books and Paraphernalia. He inquires if the man sold a Ouija board recently. The man did not. Jason, he then sees a priest on the street asking for donations. He gives the priest $13, and then he laughed at the priest for a full minute. Jason, he then went on and finally checked into his hotel room at noon. 1 hour later and 40 miles away in the swamps, Abby Cable and Swamp Thing play a game called Creature from the Black Lagoon. That name is in reference to a 1954 movie. In the game, Abby seems to swim in the swamps and Swamp Thing playfully grabs her. Apparently, Swamp Thing has been swimming under the water for half an hour. He no longer needs to breathe. Finally, once they are done, Abby emerges from the water all wet. Seeing Abby in her wet t-shirt and playing with Swamp Thing is definitely giving off some sort of sexual flirtation vibes between Abby and Swamp Thing. Abby is still a married woman, though, to Matt Cable at this time. Abby and Swamp Thing they then go lie in the grass while Abby dries off. Swamp Thing asks why Matt Cable didn't join her this time to visit him. Abby says that her and Matt aren't spending a lot of time together right now. He's a little high-strung. Abby is hinting that things are not going that well between her and Matt. She also has suspicions about Matt. She speaks very vague about all of this, though. Abby shares that she is starting a new job. She has a job at a place called Elysium Lawns. She's going to be a teacher there. It's a school for autistic children. We see a flashback to Abby's job interview at this Elysium Lawns. There, she met a creepy boy named Paul. Paul, he believes that if children don't spell things correctly, they will be killed by a creature he calls the Monkey King. One of the other teachers explains to Abby all about Paul's beliefs. They also explain about how Paul's parents were killed in something like a freak wiring accident. Despite some worries about how to deal with children with autism, Abby, she took the job happily. Back over to Jason Blood. He goes to an auction house and buys a Ouija board there. One of the patrons, named Bobby Corelli, informs Jason that the previous owner of all of these items, and the Ouija board here, they were apparently killed, and their son is now in the loony bin. We can assume that the man is crudely referring to Paul and how he is at Elysium Lawns. Jason Blood, he seemed to already know all of this. Jason, he tells Bobby another prediction of doom. He tells Bobby that he's going to be going to jail, charged with manslaughter, and that his wife Selena doesn't like the lawn chairs. Earlier, Jason told Harry Price in town about this Selena woman not buying lawn furniture. Jason leaves and Bobby is confused. Abigail goes to the motor inn that her and Matt Cable are staying in. She puts on a nice dress and gets ready to do some shopping. Matt, he complains that Abby seems more interested in the kids she's going to be teaching than him and his needs. Matt Cable implies that Abby has not been sexually taking care of him. Abby, she recognizes her husband's concerns, but she has her own worries and anxieties to deal with. She's starting a new job, so she ignores her husband for now. Abby, she leaves to go shopping, and as she leaves, Matt Cable starts using his abilities to make Abby's clothes take her form, and then behave according to his own perverted will. He tells the clothes, "There, now get on your knees and apologize." Oh no, Matt, what happened to you? Back to Elysium Lawns. Paul remembers how his parents died. His parents were using that Ouija board, the one that Jason Blood bought earlier, and they spelled the phrase Omox Hodel Chimera. And by spelling that phrase on the Ouija board, they somehow summoned that Demon Monkey King. And the Demon Monkey King killed both of Paul's parents. But then, it needed a master to stay on Earth, so it adopted their son Paul as its master. Paul, lying in his bedroom that night, has bad dreams of this Monkey King. Jason Blood, he uses that Ouija board he bought, the one previously owned by Paul's parents. By studying it, he determines how the Monkey King was able to claw its way out of its world and into this world. Jason, he then goes for a walk down the street, and some of the various premonitions he made earlier come true. Bobby and Selena Corelli bought a swordfish at the auction house earlier, instead of the lawn furniture that supposedly Selena was initially interested in. Harry Price, the salesman from earlier, tries to hit on Abby. Abby rejects him. Bobby and Selena Corelli are driving and arguing, and they almost run over Harry Price. Bobby, he slams on the brakes on his car. He stops in time, but the swordfish that they bought flies off the car and impales and kills Harry Price at the exact time that Jason Blood said earlier. Abby, she witnesses this death and is horrified. Jason Blood, he follows Abby. He seems to recognize her and introduces himself. He tells her that they have much to discuss. Back to Elysium Lawns. The Monkey King wanders the halls that night and starts tormenting and scaring the other children there. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 26, A Time of Running. Jason Blood and Abby talk over tea. Jason warns her that the school she is employed by, Elysium Lawns, there is danger there, related to a boy named Paul, whose parents died under unknown circumstances. He tells Abby to watch over the children there and try to save as many as she can. Later, Abby attends her first full day of work. All the children are highly agitated by this Monkey King from the night before. The kids, scared, all drew him on various pages in the morning. Abby, she remembers Paul talking about this Monkey King the day before. So she goes over and talks with Paul. Paul very creepily tells her, "Hello, Abigail. You know you'll die pretty soon." Paul, he then hints that the Monkey King appears to everyone by whatever they fear most. He suspects that Abby is probably afraid of spiders. That night, when Abby goes home, Matt has been drinking again. He expresses his disgust and disdain for the children at the school she works. They bit at Abby and almost ripped her hair out, and they throw up their food and they don't clean. Matt, he doesn't want her to go back there. Abby says, though, that the children need her help. Matt selfishly says, yeah, well, he needs her too. Sexually, of course. And his needs are not being met. Abby is disgusted by this and walks out. She says she's gonna go walk over and find Alec, aka Swamp Thing, who she still refers to as Alec, and see if he can help. And then she's going back to Elysium Lawns. So Abby, she runs over to the swamps and finds Swamp Thing. She explains to Swamp Thing all about Jason Blood and their conversation earlier, as well as the kids at Elysium Lawns and all of their erratic behavior. Swamp Thing somehow seemed to sense this evil presence too. He felt it in the soil and in the wind. The two of them quickly make their way over to Elysium Lawns. Later that night there, the Monkey King has returned. He visits Paul again and takes Paul by the hand. They walk through the halls, instilling more scary visions into the minds of the children there, showing them all what they are most afraid of. Abby and Swamp Thing eventually arrive, and they notice the Monkey King is already causing anarchy. Jason Blood, he has arrived as well, and he has transformed into his other form, that of the demon Etrigan. Etrigan watches from above. He eventually jumps down and prepares to battle this Monkey King. Elsewhere, Matt Cable, drinking in his motel room, decides, you know what? He feels guilty about his behavior earlier. He should go help Abby after all. So, he decides to get in his car and begin driving over to Elysium Lawns. But Matt Cable was drinking earlier, so he's drunk driving, and he veers off the road and crashes right into a tree. Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 27, by Demons Driven. The demon Etrigan and Swamp Thing are fighting this Monkey King and the various manifestations of fear. Etrigan jumps on the Monkey King's back at one point, but the Monkey King just slams Etrigan into the ground. In between the fighting, Swamp Thing tells Abigail to take Paul, whom the Monkey King seems to be most interested in, and go to the swamp. Abby eventually does so. Elsewhere, Matt Cable is all mangled and bleeding from the car crash that he was in. He is all messed up. There is a good chance he is not going to make it. Matt, while he is trapped in that car covered in all of his blood, he says, "I don't want to die." All of a sudden, though, a giant fly flies over to him and speaks to him. This giant fly is actually possessed by Anton Arcane. More on how Anton Arcane pulled this off next volume. The giant fly, though, tells Matt that he can help him survive this. Meanwhile, Abby with Paul rushes to the swamp. Etrigan eventually arrives, having made his way there. Etrigan knows of the Monkey King's mental connection with Paul, and he believes that he can stop it by killing Paul as a necessary sacrifice. Before he can do that, though, Swamp Thing arrives and attacks Etrigan. Abby and Paul, they continue running, but the Monkey King finds them. Back over to Matthew and the Anton Arcane possessed giant fly. The fly tells Matthew that he will soon bleed to death. However, the fly can help him. Matt, desperate to live, agrees to what the fly wants him to do. The fly tells Matt, well, you'll have to open your mouth as wide as it will go. Oh, yes, that's splendid. The fly then crawls into Matt's mouth and then further into his body. Back to the Monkey King. It is attacking Abby. It does so by assuming the form of her husband Matt, who clearly Abby is starting to fear. All of a sudden, though, little Paul has had enough. He cries out to the Monkey King to leave Abby alone. He yells, "You killed my mom and you killed my dad, but I'm not afraid of you." Now, the Monkey King thrives off of fear, but Paul is managing now to stand up to the Monkey King in a brave and fearless way. He starts to make the Monkey King lose its power. Paul, he continues yelling, "You're just a scummy little monkey, you don't scare me. You're a liar. You just pretend to be things. Well, you can pretend to be a monster, or a snake, or a wolf. I don't care. You're not frightening me." The Monkey King keeps shrinking and taking smaller and smaller forms as Paul is standing up to it, until eventually the Monkey King takes a form so small that it fits just right there in the palm of Paul's hand. Etrigan the demon then strolls over and simply grabs the Monkey King from Paul's fingers and eats the Monkey King, killing it. Etrigan, having swallowed the Monkey King, says a rhyme. He says, "Fear, no matter how small it has grown, returns a certain flavor of its own." Before Etrigan leaves, he warns Paul and Abby, "Your parents freed the monkey with a charm spelled out in random letters on a board. Was there some further fiend that nudged their arm?" He then turns to Abby and says, "The answer, madam, is for you to know. I've said too much. My job is done. I go." What Etrigan the demon here is referring to, actually, is Anton Arcane being the one that somehow from beyond the grave influenced Paul's parents to spell out the letters needed on the Ouija board to draw out this demon Monkey King to this world. Etrigan, he then takes his leave and walks on. Abby tells Swamp Thing to take Paul back to the school. She then runs after Etrigan. She wants to know more about the warning that he gave her. But when she finds Etrigan, he has already transformed back into his human form of Jason Blood. Jason explains, although he shares his body with Etrigan, he has no knowledge of Etrigan's warning. He says, "Etrigan knows things that I do not. If he warned you, you'd best stay on your guard. Sometimes a demon may offer words of wisdom, and sometimes they even tell the truth." Later on, Abby starts walking home in the rain, and Matt Cable drives up to her in an undamaged car. He seems perfectly fine now, like he just wasn't in this horrific car accident. Matt, he apologizes to Abby and offers to give her a drive home. And that is the end of Swamp Thing Book 1 by Alan Moore. Alright, so that was the first volume of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run. And having read all of these Swamp Thing issues leading into this, it is kind of crazy to see how much better this book can be when you put on an A-tier writer like Alan Moore and let him go nuts with it, because this volume was amazing. I especially loved the new status quo shift for Swamp Thing. How instead of him being Alec Holland, he's actually just a plant with the consciousness of Alec Holland, and he can never be Alec Holland again because he never was. Amazing. I liked that Avery Sunderland got killed. That was exciting stuff. I liked the Floronic Man arc. I thought he was a really good plant-based villain. I liked his scheme of increasing the oxygen levels around the world to kill all the animals and humans. I totally bought his motivation for wanting to do that. And I like how Swamp Thing sort of stopped him. He fought him off, but he also explained to him the errors in his logic. Amazing stuff. I also loved how the Justice League was brought into the story, but they had no idea how to stop this villain. They were kind of useless. So amazing, amazing first story arc. Now the second story arc with Elysium Lawns and Paul and the Monkey King and Jason Blood, I was not as high on. I did think it was very horrific though. And this Monkey King kind of plotline reminded me a little bit of like Stephen King and what you would see in that, how this creature used his fears to attack people. So that was interesting, although maybe not as compelling as the first story arc here, although I think it was kind of fun. So yeah, A great debut volume here. I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you all for watching. Let me know your thoughts on Alan Moore's first book here, and I will see you all again in the future with Volume 2.